Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast, episode number 193 of the show. This week I have 5 new LitRPG reviews for you folks. So before we get into that, I want to make sure to thank our newest Patreon supporter for the podcast, Aptist. Thank you for helping keeping the podcast going. Of course, if anyone at home wants to help support the podcast, keep it free and ad-free, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/geekbentspodcast. I know, different name than the LitRPG podcast, but that's the first one I used. But as far as the reviews we'll be doing this week, it'll be including Ruins of Majesta 2.1, volume 2.1. Also, Tales of Dungeons, which is a dungeon collection of short stories. Also, Shadow Sun Rebellion, Shadow Sun series, book number 3 in that series. And Death's Mantle. And last but not least, Resurrection of Adventure, book number 1, Dirty Bright Magic, The Return to Master's Quest, Resurrection of the Master's LitRPG series. The novel that's going for the longest title in the LitRPG series. There you go. But before we go into all those reviews, of course, we're going to do LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with some news from Luke Chimbalenko on his website and on Facebook. Luke Chimbalenko announced this week that he has had to delay the release of the next Ascend Online book. I know and crowds of people and fans sigh and anyways, he says that he has over 245,000 words and expects the final novel to be well over 340,000 words before editing even begins. This will push the release date past his initial December 2019 estimate, which is unfortunate. But he also explained in the post that he's doing this for quality reasons, that he's finishing this one arc, but he has other things he has to include. I remember talking to him a little bit about this at Dragon Con when we met in person. It was really nice to hang out with him. But he mentioned similar issues in having such a long story, and he's concerned. But I don't doubt that the fans are going to be more than welcoming and more than happy to see a nicely polished story, even if they have to wait till next year. Hopefully not too long, though. Nuke apologizes for the delay, but he also released some commissioned artwork titled Siegebreaker to tide you over, and we have it in our video version of the podcast. You can also check it out on the on the Facebook page that I'm referring to. I'm trying to. Okay, well, there you go. That's what I get for updating my computer. On to our next story is going to be author interview with Cameron Milan, I think. Author of the popular LitRPG series, The Towers of Heaven and the Desire series. I actually did an author interview with our podcast, the LitRPG podcast, this past weekend. Made it episode number 192 of the show, so in case you were wondering where that episode went, there it is. We have a link in the show notes. Definitely go check it out. It was very interesting to speak with him. We did a live author interview on our Facebook page, so it's there as well. But it was interesting to talk to him and see kind of his process and his thoughts. We had met before on a Drinking with Charles episode, and it was nice to kind of, talk about shop and writing stuff with him as well. So interesting guy. Definitely go check that out. And of course the books. Also, just a quick congratulations to Jonathan Brooks for his success on his second book in the Dungeon Crafting series. It's almost on Amazon's top 100, which is really good for any story. If you haven't got a chance to read that particular novel and you like Dungeon Core novels, I definitely recommend you do so. This is, I enjoyed book number 1, gave it a review score of 7.6 out of 10. Book 2 seems to be doing even better, so definitely check those out. Okay. And also, Mountain Press is celebrating their anniversary as publisher. So congrats to you guys. But they're also doing a giveaway all week up until October the 5th. So if you want to enter any of the giveaways for any of their novels, and they have quite a few, including ebooks and audiobooks, definitely go check out the Facebook page at Mountain Press. And I believe they have a Twitter and a web page. And like I said, but this contest is definitely coming from their Facebook page, and they're letting people, enter by giving comments about every day of the week, and they'll do a giveaway until October the 5th when their actual anniversary is. So there you go. And thanks to you guys. On to stuff that is out now, stuff that has come out. I haven't read it. It just came out. A podcast includes Ferried, a LitRPG adventure, Monster Maces and Magic, book number 4 in that series. We also have Hero Online, book number 2 in the Darkness Online, book number 2 as well as out. The third book in the Transformation series called Dark Legacy is out for you to read. Crafter's Dungeon, which we just talked about. The Crafter's Defense. Also out as is Team Noob, Sun and Shadow Online, book number 1. and another title without a actual cover art. I think this is just a publication error. I think the author intended to put a cover art, including the ones that are free. But it's Dungeon Maker. The author is, I forget his name, but I read other things before, and some of them are good, some of them not. So Dungeon Maker is another one that's out now. Okay, new LitRPG audiobooks. This is a much shorter list, and that include the Time Master Interworld Network series book number 1 is an audiobook. Also, Varnath is out as an audiobook if you're a fan of Lavelle Jackson or his LitRPG review YouTube channel. Definitely go check it out. Also, God of Gnomes, God Core book number 1 from Portal Books. They've actually been a nice company, been putting out some actual LitRPG stories. So that's not always the case with some publishers who say they're LitRPG publishers, but they've been relatively good and entertaining stories from all the stuff they published, and this one's doing pretty well. So a lot of people seem to be enjoying it. It's out as an ebook and as an audiobook. On to upcoming LitRPG. This is just where we do a bunch of stuff that's coming out in the near future. Feel free to skip ahead, but there are some new titles to this list, including some from your favorite authors, including Daniel Schienhofen. He just finished his Offworld series. He has a new series coming out on October the 15th called Resurrection Quest, and the first book in that series will be out again on October the 15th. On October the 16th, it'll be Dungeon Dive, a LitRPG short story, Tales from the Gods game, book number 1. On October the 17th, the second book in the Bad Guy series, Second Story Man, will be out. October the 17th as well, Universe ICS Keymaster. The third book in the NPC's Path book series will be out on October 21st. The fifth book in the Reality Bender series will be out October 23rd. The second book in the Skyrim's Online series, called Silver Peak, will be out October 29th. October 31st, it'll be the second book in the Varna series, called The Black Blade, book number 2. November 1st, it'll be The Dark Path. November 1st, it'll be Riftworld Online, book number 2. The second book in the World of Karik series will be out on November the 4th. The second book in the Interworld Network series will be out on November the 7th. The first book in the Last Time Loop series, again by Antonov Emanov and Sergei Slavinov, will be out on November the 11th, actually translating quite a number of titles from those authors into English. November the 22nd, the third book in the Dragon Heart series called Blood will be out. The second book in the Knockout series, which I was surprised got one, but it'll be out on December the 9th. Then the second book in the Underdog series, which is a series I actually enjoyed, the first book, December 23rd. And there we go, folks. All the stuff up until almost Christmas. That'll be coming out in the near future, and on to new releases and reviews. Okay, here we go, folks. This first book for the week is going to be Ruins of Majesta, volume number 2.1, Creatures and Cupcakes, written by Taj McCoy L. It is 821 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, and here is the author's description. Maya, Grax, and Margaret, better known as the Royal Deathclaw, have just entered the prize dungeon they won in the Paladins tournament. Now they just have to survive in the bowels of a sprawling mess of underground world filled with dangers around every corner and under every leaf. It's a gamer's paradise, but there's one problem. Our tiny heroine, Pretty Princess Cuddlefluff, is still stuck in the expansive VR game world of Majesta. It isn't half bad until Grax and Margaret log out and she gets reminded that her life is on the line. With her log up on inoperable and malicious AI searching for her in-game, she's struggling to get as strong as possible to survive the inevitable clash for survival, because in the dungeon, her chances of dying have just risen significantly. This novel contains big hammers, cats, enchanting, snark, grenades, necromancy leveling, fetch quest, beeps, and boops, misunderstandings of the deadliest kind, olfactory, industrial offenses, grandmothers, evil, sentient, computer viruses, truces, crafting duels, getting gear, friendship, happiness, sweet XP. Safe for kids, great for adults. So that's all in the novel description. There's actually a little bit more, but I'm not going to read that. I enjoyed this story, but not as much as book 1. That's kind of the review. Parts of the Dungeon Dive felt like they went on a little bit too long, and it started to feel like kind of a grind to read occasionally. The brother's story, which is a second introduced POV into this particular novel, it's funny. It's interesting in its own right, but it doesn't really feel connected to the main character's story, outside of a couple of specific instances. I kind of felt the same about the third point of view in this novel, which is the POV for the villain. If you're familiar with the first book, you're going to know what it is. But it isn't its own particular story POV. Point of view, rather. Very interesting kind of storyline, but again, feels completely unrelated to the book. And it feels more like it's set up for future novels. And that's not necessarily bad, but it is something that reduced my enjoyment of this particular novel. The author notes at the end of the story that he acknowledges that these particular things are specific story decisions. And I can absolutely respect that. I really do respect authors' and decision to include anything or not including anything, including the fact that the main brother has his own storyline rather than give him a separate one. The author also notes that the main character's storyline may feel a little anticlimactic to some people, even having characters within the story to kind of joke about that. But he notes that the dungeon arc isn't done, and then in book 2.2, he'll hopefully be able to continue that story and finish off by Christmas of this year. So basically, it feels like this story is only part of the intended book narrative. That's something the author addresses in the back of the book, of course, in the author note, that he had to kind of decide whether to make the brother's story its own kind of side novel, whether to delay the release of this novel by finishing the entire story arcs he wanted to, even though make it bigger than 821 pages. And those were, again, all author decisions, and I completely respect that. But at the same time, it does kind of leave me feeling as a reader, this is only part of a novel, part of an actual completed story, even though like each one of the storylines that are there has a resolution. And I'm not saying it doesn't, but they don't always feel connected to each other. And I feel like that was something that was intended for a longer story arc, where like maybe the brothers' story arc would eventually intertwine back in with the sisters, the main characters, or like that villain storyline would come into play somewhere. And none of that happens in this novel, which makes it feel a little less satisfying to me. Because those are interesting stories, but they don't really have any payoff in relation to the main character story, which is the person I came for. Again, I enjoy the novel, just not as much as book one. There were still the enjoyable things I liked from book one: the crafting, good funny banter, dialogue. The main character still shines as a plucky heroine, making intelligent decisions and not taking crap from anybody, while still maintaining a heart of gold, which is kind of the big draw for the story, in my opinion, is that unique main character. That again, you're not going to get a lot of kid main characters, female characters, or persons of color as main characters. And so all those things combine to make something special just with that aspect alone. And again, the rest of the writing is pretty decent. Action is good. Dialogue is definitely a highlight with the funny banter. But for me, this novel on a whole gets a score of 7.3 out of 10, which is, again, slightly slower than the initial novel. But still an enjoyable score for an enjoyable book. It's going to be Ruin the Majesta Volume 2.1, Creatures and Cupcakes, with a score of 7.3 out of 10. And next we have Tales of Dungeons, edited by Jeffrey Falcon-Logue, Volume 1. It is actually, again, a short story collection. I'll read the description in a second. It's a total of 204 pages, $2.99, available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the the editor's description. This is an anthology collection of dungeon core stories created by authors both old and new. It is in the dungeons where adventures begin and end, where brave adventurers, orphan children with grudges, shady protagonists, and fools dive into seeking power, wealth, and sating their bloodthirst. Dungeons come in many shapes and sizes, with each holding their own adventure within and stories of past glories. Here, some of the stories can be found, taken from the deep, dark depths of imagination and horror found within us all. Welcome to the dungeon. Good luck escaping. So there you go. This is going to collect short stories evolve around a dungeon in some way or form. Some are dungeon dives, others are dungeon core stories, and others I call dungeon adjacent. And I'll get to why in individual reviews. Some of the stories are LitRPG, but not all of them. So just be aware of that going in. Like many short story collections, not everything's going to be good, not everything's going to be amazing, and not everything's going to be your favorite. That's kind of the fun and the downside of short story collections, that you get a bunch of potentially really, great nugget size storytelling opportunities, and some are going to be real gems, and some might not be to your particular taste. But you're not investing a ton of time into them, so it's feel like it's okay. You're taking a chance on new particular authors and stories, and that might lead you to finding some new series that you might like from that same author, which is why short story collections exist to some degree. And overall, though, for me, this collection was entertaining, and I'm going to get to the interview reviews now. The first story in the series is called Core's Law by Michael Harrington. Essentially, it's the last stand for the remaining dungeon cores against a crusade against them. There's some decent fights and traps, but I never really cared about either side of the conflict. the big twist in the story is essentially how several very common tropes and dungeon rules came about as humans in dungeons negotiated for peace. It was kind of a miss of a story for me, so it gets a score of 6 out of 10 on its own. Next is Depths of Buzzing by Damien Spearman. This one was actually hard for me to read because of technical writing issues. There are a lot of mixing of past and present tenses in the same sentence and paragraphs, and there were shifts in the tense of the story, which made it a little challenging to reading it into. Other than that, though, it's a kind of a straightforward dungeon run by a group. So for me, it's score 6 out of 10, kind of misses again. Next is Fishhook's Revenge, Part 1 by Anthony W.F. Chow. This one was actually an entertaining story. It talks about a defeated goblin dungeon core who reincarnates as a human and seeks his revenge, gaining a class, training, and even leveling skills to do so. He runs into a small goblin clan while on his way to a city for that revenge. And it's a kind of a good mix of world building, character development, and action. And there are lots of story threads in here where you can see, oh, this is potentially going to develop into something else or to a larger series. Gets a score of 7.6 out of 10 for me. I enjoyed it. Next is The Human Dungeon by Stuart Gross, who has written quite a number of LitRPG series. It's a short story about a bard/rogue falling for the enticements of a trio of hot ladies and ending up the sacrifice to make a dungeon core. It's funny, and while there's a little bit of sexuality to it, there's no graphic sex, but there are some interesting world and character building moments that I found entertaining, and overall it gets a score of 7.5 out of 10. I had a good time with it. Next is Nature versus /Nurture and Necromancy. So Nature versus Necromancy. By Raymond Johnson, who, full disclosure, also works for the podcast. He's the host of our show, the LitRPG audiobook podcast. This was genuinely the best story, in my opinion. Again, he works for us, so he's part of the LitRPG podcast family. But at the same time, I would be honest with you guys if it wasn't entertaining. This was kind of a very unique perspective in that it doesn't really revolve around the dungeon dive experience. It really just focused on the dungeon cores. It kind of has this good buddy dungeon story at the beginning that's very light, fluffy, and humorous, and then plenty of summarized monster evolutions, and then this like dark twist that I thought was really great. And I genuinely mean that. It was a really nice dark twist, and I could see it leading into like this larger entertaining story with actual like more developed dungeon mechanics that are detailed and explained. But it kind of just has this nice crispy nugget of a story that I really liked. So much so that I give it a score of 8 out of 10. So it's great short story. Next is Proving Grounds by Nick Tesoro. This is actually the longest of the short stories. It actually takes up like 20% of the novel. It's a long water themed dungeon dive. That's really essentially what it is. It has a nice variety of monsters, and each adventurer gets at least a few paragraphs or backstory, which is nice. It wasn't an amazing story. It's essentially a pretty decent dungeon dive with, good action. But it also reminds me why I never liked water levels in video games, which is probably its point. Gets a score of 7.1 out of 10 for me. Next is Sword and Claw, The Lost Dungeons by Miles Trombley. Two girls playing an MMO get an early lead on a hidden dungeon, but end up helping an NPC villager, who happens to be hot, get revenge on the demon that destroyed his city. I'm not really sure this is if there's a dungeon here at all. It kind of just felt like it was a straight adventure with a couple of trap sections and a fight with an end twist. The dialogue was a little bit stilted sometimes, which kind of ruined some of the potentially funny banter moments. Other moments are very funny and cute. But overall, it was hard to keep me engaged with this particular one. So for me, it gets a score of 6 out of 10. Didn't quite work for me, but other people might find it very entertaining. Definitely go give it a chance. Also, next is Space Within a Space by Zachary Ude, UDE. This is the shortest of the short stories in the collection. I believe it was like 2 or 3% of the entire novel. And I'm honestly not sure what this is. It's not a dungeon core story, not a dungeon dive. This is one of the, I think, dungeon adjacent stories that I mentioned earlier. I think it might be the start of a dungeon core novel that was submitted. But this little section of itself is not really have anything to do with the dungeon at all. It's entertaining. There's some cute little moments. But it feels like a tease for longer story. It was entertaining though, so it gets a score of 7.1 out of 10. And the last short story is Ghosts of the Past by Jeffrey Falcon Logue, who's the author of the Slime Dungeon Chronicles. This one again also feels like it's dungeon adjacent, and that it feels like it's the start of a longer story. It has good world building, good action, but again, no actual dungeon again. So I think it really is just like a beginning section or a potentially side story of a character in an actual dungeon core novel that he might be writing. Still, it was entertaining enough that I wanted to read a longer story with these characters. So gets a score of 7.4 out of 10 for me as a short story. So there you go. Overall, the entire collection, I liked more of them than I didn't, and there's definitely a couple gems in here. So it gets a score of 7.2 out of 10 as a collection. That's Tales of Dungeons with a score of 7.2 out of 10. And next we have Shadow Sun Rebellion, Shadow Sun Series Book Number 3, written by Dave Wilmarth. It is about 500 pages. Amazon, as of this recording, doesn't actually have an actual page count for this. So I'm going to assume 500 to 600 pages. It is $5.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. The 1-year stabilization period has ended, and the aliens are colonizing Earth. Alistair and his people have prepared as well as possible, and now they'll find out if it was enough. In this third book of the Shadow Sun series, Earth survivors continue to fight for their lives and to reclaim as much of the Earth as they can for the human race. More than one alien faction threatens their existence, while others prove to be staunch allies. Alistair and company learn more about the system, its mechanics, and politics, and take the first steps into bringing their fight to enemies off-world. So there we go. Full disclosure, I received an advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. This is just another fun read in the Shadow Sun series. I think a lot of people have fallen in love with it. Good action adventure. There's some survivalist RPG stuff in the first novel. And just really good characters. It actually reminds me a lot of the Amarillo series in that as the books go on, the cast is getting bigger and you're kind of getting more advanced town building stuff in there, in addition to like the survivalist stuff or the crafting and the action adventure stuff with like aliens and fantasy monsters and RPG stuff. In this novel, in the third book, the group continues to expand their holdings while trying to fend off alien attacks. Now that their safe period is over, there are fewer survival elements, and that's just a product of this novel taking place like over the course of like a year. This third book takes place after that initial year setup, so there's less of a need in the story for those survival elements because the main group and its characters have already done the survival stuff. However, there's still very similar elements of tension to what a survival story has, and that not everything is necessarily straightforward action adventure. Some of it has very tension over trust issues, reputations, and resource scarcity. And so there is still very much that kind of survivalist tension in some of the story arcs within this novel. But there's still good action here, as there have in previous books, with fighting against monsters, aliens, and other humans still fighting and conflicting. While the story universe is getting bigger and bigger, I like the fact that the author still takes the time to maintain the core group intimacy that I enjoyed from book 1. So for overall, a good action adventure oriented story, LitRPG story that continues to satisfy readers. For me, it gets a score of 7.7 out of 10. That's Shadow Sun Rebellion, the third book in the Shadow Sun series, with a score of 7.7 out of 10. And next we have Death's Mantle by Harmony Cooper. This is... Wait, it's a long novel description. It's 541 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the novel description. Lucas North is supposed to be dead. Suffering from a rare heart condition the doctors say should have killed him over a year ago. Lucas is playing a video game when death finally comes. Rather than give in, Lucas pulls a gun on the Grim Reaper. As the two stare each other down, terrible demons known as Injure Souls swarm into the room in pursuit of Death. Summoning courage he never knew he had, Lucas comes to Death's aid, and for his trouble, he's awarded Death's Mantle. Transported to a spiritual world he could never have fathomed, Lucas finds that he is instantly powerful, able to conjure weapons from scratch and perform incredible feats. He introduces game mechanics to this new world, develops a carefully curated inventory list, and modifies a HUD system that allows him to better track his targets. It isn't easy being Death, and Lucien will need just about everything he can as he faces off against fallen angels, appalling parasites, demon-born Injure Souls, and savage Death Hunters. Regardless of his sudden strength, his newfound enemies, and his gamer ingenuity, Lucas can communicate with the living, which wouldn't be a problem if he hadn't discovered something terrible about his family. Lucan's brother is scheduled to die, and only Lucien has the power to do anything about it. And there we go. And there's a whole list of this extra stuff. Okay. Full disclosure, I received Man's copy for review. This is an entertaining novel. It looks at how a new Grim Reaper uses his gamer experience to become powerful. The story has a light power progression mechanic. It basically is this, that as the main character kills parasites that have attached themselves to humans, extending their life or causing varying devices, the main character gains death points that he uses to create powerful weapons and powers. And that is essentially the progression mechanic in the story. The story has a goal for the main character, but it mostly explores the idea of death, death being similar to how it is in some animes, including like the Shinigami from Death Note or the Shinigami from Bleach, the anime or the manga series, whichever you prefer, with a gamer interface kind of thrown into the mix. It questions what role death has and why they're opposed by other spiritual factions. And it almost gets philosophical in some places with the main characters thinking to himself or questioning the status quo. And whether it's moral for the Grim Reapers or the Shinigami to exist. And I thought it was an interesting read. It's a little too light on progression for me to like have truly like loved it or anything. I enjoyed it. It gets a good like a 7.1 review score for me. But it was probably never getting anything bigger than just because the progression system is super light. And I just would have, in my head, as I was reading, I was like, oh, this would be a great place for a different kind of progression system or more details here or like more crunchy numbers or something else. You know what I mean? And in my brain, I was always building something that I could see implemented here. But again, this is an author's choice to respect it. And I had a good time with it. It's just that it's hard for me to really love something or enjoy something when the RPG aspects of it aren't fleshed out as I would have hoped. But still, entertaining story at 7.1 out of 10. That's Death Mantle with a score of 7.1 out of 10. And the last review for the show is going to be long title. It's going to be Resurrection of Adventure Book Number 1, During Run Magic, The Return of the Master's Quest, Resurrection of the Master's LitRPG series by Andrew Bardsley. So there you go. Long title, 168 pages, $2.99 available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. He was killed on Earth in a deadly street fight, just because he was trying to survive in the streets running a con. Crix finds himself in a world full of action adventure. To his excitement, he finds that his world is full of magic and monsters, but he has to struggle with no combat or magic skills. So this would-be this would-be con man has to fake it to survive. This leads him into a dangerous situation that nobody would normal survive. So normally survive, I think that's what that means. There's also an extract from the book, which I'm not going to read. It is, again, a relatively short novel. And it's actually shorter than the novel description or the pitch and actually reviews. And I'll talk about that in a second. The novel description and cover art don't accurately describe some of the highlights of this slice of life story. It starts out with the main character dying in a way that kind of reveals some of his character flaws or his character aspects, and I thought that was nice. And then getting transported to a fantasy RPG world by cheating and conning Death himself. From there, the main character explores and figures out the rules of this new RPG world where he makes money by continuing to con and scam the medieval communities. While this doesn't sound like it's a great story, it's rather more detailed and interesting than I thought it would be. So I was pleased that essentially this was better than I thought it was going to be from the cover art. There's a good use of body language study and skills a good grifter would use. There's also some good internal dialogue where the main character questions and explores the way this world is different from our own and the logical consequences of the information he's gradually learning. While there's very little combat, there are other kinds of conflict, including social and economic ones. One of the few things I didn't like about the story is the fact that it's actually shorter than it says it is. The last 20% of this it feels like it's completely filler. Like there's a lot of paragraphish descriptions of other stories that don't exist yet, or in the novel, in the author's description or author's back catalog, and also the first chapter from a completely different novel that has not I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting, and it takes about 20% of the actual back end of an already short story, so didn't enjoy that. Overall, though, while the story doesn't really have a plot against slice of life, it's an interesting slice of life story with a non-hero main character looking to take advantage of those around him with quick hands, a charming smile, and an intelligent mind. I thought it was a fun read. to read about the kind of character who's, again, not the shining knight in white armor. And there's plenty of RPG skill mechanics and stuff. So definitely decent there. For me, gets a score of 7.4 out of 10. That's Resurrection Adventure Book Number 1, Dirty Rat Magic, The Return of the Master's Quest, Resurrection of the Master's LitRPG series, with a score of 7.4 out of 10. Okay, there we go. That's it, folks. We are done. Thanks for hanging out, watching with us, watching me talk about LitRPG. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, on our webpage. Just look for LitRPG Podcasts on any of those locations, and you should find us out. And, of course, we have some fun links to some groups, including LitRPG Books, LitRPG Society, the Fantasy Nation, and Dirty Spoiled Rotten Readers. All fun locations where LitRPG authors congregate and talk to fans, and we have good discussions about this genre we love, so definitely check them out. And of course, if you want to support the podcast in any way, shape, or form, you can find all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. And again, thanks folks for hanging out with me today. And until we can hang out again, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.